Today's headline is Harboring a Tramp. It says, "So Charlie puts you off when you ask him to do odd jobs around the house," said Mrs. Dill to her daughter-in-law. "Well, I'm not surprised. He gets that straight enough from his father. Why don't you tell him that if he doesn't do better, you'll be harboring a tramp someday, just the same as his mother did once. He'll know what you mean." "I was all out of patience that morning," Mother Dill continued. "There were things in the garden and about the house to be done, and I begged Pa to give me a few hours. But he had so many irons in the fire that he simply couldn't stop to potter at home. He had scarcely got out of sight when a tramp appeared at the door. He had the usual story, out of money and out of work, and could I give him something to eat? 'Well,' says I, 'there's one thing I'm not out of, and that's work. I can give you some of that first, and afterwards a breakfast.' I expected him to mutter something and march off, but he didn't. He said, 'All right, ma'am,' and when I came to get a second look at him, I thought he had a much better face than most of his kind. So I trusted him for his breakfast, and after he had eaten a good meal, and he had a hearty appetite, I can tell you, we went to the garden. I don't know when I had so enjoyed myself. The man knew how to take orders, and he was real sociable too, and told me the story of his life, not sparing himself in the least. He said that he was brought up well, and that he was tired of the life he had been leading, and wanted to go back to his home. It was noon before I knew it, and of course I wouldn't send him off without his dinner. Then while I was talking with him at dinner, I found that he was handy with tools, so I had him make over the grapevine trellis and mend the back steps and putty up some of the windows and put up some shelves in one of the closets. Along toward night, he said he guessed he would have to be moving, so I put him up a lunch and paid him 50 cents and told him always to think of me as a friend. He hadn't much more than got out of the yard when Pa drove in. I couldn't wait for him to unharness before showing him how much a man could accomplish when he was willing to listen to reason. Pa sniffed a little, but he couldn't find a word of fault to say until I took him up to the clothes closet to see the new shelves. Then he made a dive for the pocket of a vest of his that hung there and roared out, 'Did you leave that fellow here alone?' 'Only for a minute,' says I, kind of scared. 'That's what comes from harboring a tramp,' says Pa. 'My wallet is gone, and your day's work has cost me about $40. My heart was right in my mouth, but I kept a stiff upper lip. 'Well,' says I, 'perhaps if you'd spend a little time fixing things up in the beginning, it would save your money in the end.' He made no answer, but said he'd start right off after the fellow, and maybe catch him and jail him. Among Pa's irons in the fire was being deputy sheriff. I went along to identify. The man hadn't much of a start, and we soon caught sight of him hurrying along through a piece of woods. 'Hi there,' Pa yelled, and the tramp stopped right in his tracks, waiting for us to come up. As Pa jumped out of the wagon, he clapped his hand into his inside pocket, and the look on his face fairly scared me. Then he walked right up to the poor fellow and laid his hand on his shoulder. 'You the chap that worked for my wife today?' says Pa. 'Yes, sir,' says the tramp, taking off his cap to me as polite as you please. 'Paid you 50 cents, did she?' says Pa. 'Yes, sir,' says he. 'Well,' says Pa, 'that was a ridiculous price for what you did. Here's a $2 bill, and see here,' says Pa, 'if you're in earnest about wanting to work, come back to my house in the morning, and I'll try to find you a job.' Then, after a few more words, he got into the wagon and we turned round. 'Why didn't you arrest that man for stealing?' says I when we were out of earshot. 'Well,' says he, 'I know a thief when I see him, and he isn't one.' But I wasn't going to be put off by any such palaver as that. 'Where'd you get that $2 you paid him?' says I. 'Out of the wallet that you missed?' Then Pa owned up, although he hated to. He had felt that wallet in his vest pocket just as he jumped out of the wagon. He'd been carrying it all day, supposing he had left it at home. Well, the man, Duggan his name was, did come round next morning and got his job. He kept at it, steady as a mill too, until he had saved up money enough to go back home. So my harboring of a tramp turned out pretty well that time, although I've never tried it since. For one thing, I've never seen another tramp that resembled Duggan. And then Pa is a grain better than he used to be about jobbing round home." This story comes from the great state of West Virginia, being reported in the Shepherdstown Register of June 7th, 1917. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.